Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Property Podcast today. I've got Phil Shelley with me today from Hello Neighbour. Now, as you know, I get all of my guests to do their own intro because, let's face it, they can do it a lot better than I can. So, first off, Phil, I'm going to pass over to you. Quick bit about you, background, and about Hello Neighbour, and also we're going to talk about some research you've done. So if you don't mind introducing that for some of the questions I've got lined up, because I think this will make for an exciting podcast in terms of what we can find from the data and things you've been putting together. So Phil, I'm going to hand over to you and then I'm going to be quiet.
Thanks, Lee. I am Phil Shelley. I'm chairman of Hello Neighbour. I've been chairman for three and a half years. And in that time, Hello Neighbour has grown very significantly. We have a dual product, so we do a managed letting and property management service, and then we do a DIY service for landlords who want to use our platform to list their property or to find tenants and then move them in. We've grown very significantly, as I say, and we're probably doing or have done 4,000 or 5,000 lets. We're managing just under 1,000 properties. Our DIY product is being used by a couple of hundred landlords a month and growing very fast. My own background, I was an investment banker for my sins for 25 years, became a public company chief executive for a financial services company, which was challenging from a regulatory standpoint, one would have to say. Did that for a few years, and then I've gone to the private side. So I have a couple of companies where I'm chairman, and I also am chairman of a small charity that's also growing very fast.
Wicked. And Phil, thank you so much for the intro. I want you to explain a little bit about this beautiful 28-page report. Now, don't worry, we're not going to read all the words in it, but some of the stuff is from it. So talk to me a little bit about the 28-page report and what's in it, and then we can ask some questions around it.
Yeah, of course. Look, I think we have felt for some time that landlords get a pretty poor rap, particularly from the media and from the political circus, but they are assumed to be wealthy. They're assumed to make a lot of money, and we know that's not the case, and many landlords know that's not the case. And indeed, it's quite hard to make money as a landlord, given all the extra charges, taxes, interest rate increases, and of course renters' rights, which have brought a great deal of extra cost and significant extra risk. And so we've written a report. It's 28 pages, for which I apologise, but only because we wanted to go through in detail some basic scenarios in London and Manchester based on average rent levels, average properties, to give a good feel for what an average landlord might be able to learn or earn in those two centres. We've also taken Zoopla's data on the regional market and also on the 10 best places to rent as they see it, and we've run the same numbers for them. And when we look at the whole report, its conclusion in a summary is landlords are certainly not rich. They're making returns of somewhere between 2 and 5% on average. There are obviously a lot of big factors in the cost element that we've got into, and we can talk about in some detail, but ultimately the returns, as in the operating returns, the profit you make as a landlord in cash terms is very small, particularly when you think about the increased risk that landlords now face from various different elements of regulation. We think that's a really important thing for people to understand, both from
Definitely.
a media standpoint and from a political standpoint.
Definitely. And Phil, why have you chosen to publish this research now?
Well, I think it's worth just stepping back a little bit, and it's important to understand who landlords are, apart from the else. Notwithstanding there has been a shift to the more professional multi-property landlord, we still have 45% of the rental market, which is roughly 5 million properties across the UK. About 45% of it, these are government stats, are single property owners. And indeed, that goes up quite significantly. Another 38% only have between 2 and 4 properties. So that's a huge part of the market that are not in the sort of institutional or multi-property bucket. And those landlords are certainly not rich and maybe accidental, and they are particularly vulnerable when it comes to finances. And we can talk about that in detail. But we did it now, mainly because a number of things are coming together to really pinch landlords. Obviously, the tax change that happened some time ago in terms of mortgage tax relief has made a big difference, particularly for high tax earners. And that may seem like a crocodile tear type situation, but ultimately, if you are renting a property and taking in average London, say £28,000 worth of rent, that's going to make a significant difference to your tax bracket. And so for higher rate taxpayers are significantly impacted by that change in mortgage tax release. You've also had interest rates rising from, believe it or not, they were down to 0.1% not that long ago, and they're now at 3.75. So that's a big factor for mortgage owners or buy-to-let operators. And then the costs. Management costs have gone up very significantly, and with various different surveys, we can see it from our own managed properties in some detail, but we're talking 20 or 30% increase over the last 3 or 4 years, and that makes a big difference. As particularly if you have some major outlays like boilers or like damp, big expenses on the management side. And then, of course, the final one is regulation. So we have seen a number of different elements of regulation in various different guises. The renters' rights, obviously the most recent, and we think that means that the risk has now reached a level where landlords have to mitigate it with cost and actions. So things like references are essential. Inventory, we think, is very important, particularly done by a professional, independent inventory firm. We think landlord insurance now is very important too.
Yes.
All of these things just add cost. So there's increased costs from compliance, increased costs from management, increased costs from interest rates if you've got a mortgage. The tax is not very helpful. There are a number of other areas. Licensing is growing incredibly fast in the UK. It's been given to councils to do since December 2024, and they are making the most of it, and they are making huge amounts of revenue from landlords by charging licenses. And the number of properties that now need a license has gone up very significantly. Even in this year, I think we're at about 162 licenses, which is up from last year. We're only halfway through. So that is going to be a continuing problem for all landlords. And if you get it wrong, it's very expensive. And the fines have all been increased very significantly through the renters' rights. Voids are getting bigger. The number of tenants looking for properties has reduced. Rental prices are flatter. All of these things to create a significant pinch point. And that's from a profit standpoint.
Yes.
If you're thinking about capital growth, sorry, just one last thing. If you think about capital growth, even capital growth is scheduled to decline in terms of, I think Savills came up with 18.5% over the next 5 years. That sounds like a big number, but actually when you take out all the costs, it's probably about 1% return on equity over for each of the next 5 years. So tiny. And if you add the capital growth to the profit, the absolute return you make as a landlord is still less in most cases than a simple cash ISA where you put it in the ISA and you leave it, get 4.5% return. So we don't think that's a great position from which to further squeeze landlords, which is certainly on the cards.
And I was just about to say, so do you think that's what's made it the change to make it so much harder as a landlord, those aspects?
But all of those aspects, I think, have had a significant impact on the P&L alone, and that's why we come to the conclusion you can barely make money from being a landlord. And by the way, many landlords don't make money, and we've just we're in the middle of doing a survey of our landlords, and about 30% say they don't make money at all. So it's the combination of all those factors. Each individually you can write off, but when you add them all together, which the government seems loath to do, then it makes it really hard for a landlord to make money. And we think now is the time to be very vocal about it, because the political debate is obviously very live about what the government does next to landlords.
Yes, agreed. And what are the main costs you think for a landlord?
I mean, I think the largest, if you've got a mortgage, is obviously your mortgage cost, which is obviously significant and significantly higher than it was. I'm not going to predict where interest rates go, but they're unlikely to change that much in the next 12 months, and that's a significantly higher cost than the sort of levels we were seeing 3 or 4 years ago. The cost of agents is another big cost. Now, we would say this because we provide a DIY product, but landlords should think very hard about whether they use an agent, whether they do it themselves. The DIY platforms are now incredibly efficient and incredibly safe, above all, and they are very cheap compared to an agent. And agent costs, they charge a percentage, and those have not come down. If anything, they've gone up. And the extra costs that you get stung with by high street agents is quite significant. So that's a big cost. I think management is one that people tend to forget about, but it's a significant running cost. So repairs, maintenance. I mean, we spend roughly, or our landlords spend roughly £1,000 a year on maintenance. Now, that's really low. Most estimates are closer to 3,000. For our analysis, we've used 1,000 in outside London and 1,500 inside London, just to give you a rough idea of what we've used in our analysis. But the numbers are much higher for many people. And of course, if something goes wrong, then that gets really painful. Things like damp and boiler replacements, those sorts of things really set landlords back. I was talking to the landlord only yesterday. He said he had to rent the property for another 16 years in order to make the money back on the cost of damp that he had to deal with. I mean, these are big problems that you have to manage as a landlord. I mean, I would say you can try and prevent them, but that's a big cost. And then voids, if your property is not let for any period of time, then obviously you're losing money. And that can be very significant. I think the average numbers are sort of somewhere around the 21-day mark. You don't have to have a void if you plan for it, or plan for change of tenant, which is hard to do in today's regulation, but you can still do it. Things like licenses, they can be very expensive, several £1,000s in some elements of London, or some parts of London. So these are significant costs. And then compliance, I mean, how long is a piece of string? Depends how safe you want to be, but we've estimated a few £100s per property, but it could be a great deal more. And obviously, the risk is the thing that people forget, is that you are now on risk for considerably larger fines than previously. And if you get hit one of those, then that really does make a hole in your P&L, not just for the first year, but for many years as a landlord.
Yep. So we've got kind of the things that can sort of go wrong as a landlord and that aspect. I want to ask around, what can landlords do to maximise returns?
Well, I've touched on it a bit. I mean, I think obviously mortgages are in a huge state of flux, so shopping around is really valuable. We have a mortgage partner, or two mortgage partners, because we think it is important for landlords. And both of them will give you good advice on what you should be looking for, but it is a really significant swing factor in your P&L. Obviously, we talked about agents. I mean, given how easy it is now to do a DIY process for finding a tenant specifically, so our platform takes roughly 15 minutes from the point at which you enter the platform to the point at which your property is listed on Rightmove and Zoopla and on the market, and that's not that long. And the system is very protective, so it's very safe for landlords. It makes sure that you do the right things, you do the right tenant references, you do the right pre-qualification, etc., etc. So it's a much safer process than it's ever been, and it's quick and easy, and it saves you huge amounts of money. To list a property on Hello Neighbour is £29 versus an agent's fee, which might be as much as 20% in London. That's 20% of an annual rent. So you can see it's a big swing factor. So that's a cost saving that people should think about. Obviously, not everybody wants to manage their own property, particularly when it comes to managing tenants, repairs, and maintenance. But it does make a significant impact on your returns as a landlord. And then management. I mean, I sometimes feel I'm teaching my grandmother to suck eggs when I talk about this, but I mean, there are simple things you can do, like service the boiler annually. That should avoid a rapid and expensive replacement, which you don't want to do. As we know, everything that happens quickly is more expensive. Things like cleaning the gutters, cleaning air vents, these are simple things you can do to try and reduce damp. Really being sharp on damp, because that is a problem. If it's there, even in minor way, it will get worse, and that will cause you much greater problems if you don't fix it quickly. So things like inspections, making sure that you inspect your property, or agent inspects the property. That's really valuable, because you can see some of these problems early and therefore cut down your repair and maintenance costs and any other problems you might have with the tenants generally. I would say that finding the wrong tenant is probably one of the worst things that you can do for your P&L. So being really clear about, have you got comprehensive referencing, full open banking checks, full previous landlord, previous workplaces, etc. All of that data, and are they fully tech literate? So can they identify forged documents, etc., etc.? These are things that you must have as part of a reference. Otherwise, it's probably not worth the paper it's written on. So really effective referencing, really carefully choosing that process of who is the right tenant. That's a really important part of making sure you get the right tenant to the greatest extent you can. You won't always get it right every time, but if you take simple professional measures to make sure that you've done the checks, that will help you. The inventory is the same thing. If you get a professional inventory, there's no argument. There's no argument about what was the state that the property was in when they moved in. And so when they move out, you won't have arguments about deposits and everything else. What you do, you've got a piece of paper that is hard fact. It's not opinion. And that's really valuable. None of these things are very expensive. References are 24 quid if you go through Hello Neighbour. Inventories are 95. So it's not a very expensive thing to do, but it does save you if things go wrong, and you have to plan for that. And then finally, insurance, worthwhile taking if you're worried about losing it or having a void period because the tenant doesn't pay, and it takes a long time to get rid of tenants in today's world, and the tribunal process, the renters' rights are brought in, will make it even harder and even longer. That's going to cost you a lot of money. So insurance is becoming, if not essential, it's certainly very important.
Agreed.
These are all things you can do, but I mean, shopping around, looking for the best deals, making sure you take advantage of all the offers on around. I mean, we have a partner in Currys who give people a 10% discount. You know, things like that are valuable, and use them if you can find them.
Okay. And now let's get my crystal ball out and ask you around, will the situation improve, and what do you think will happen next?
Well, there's some good stuff and some bad stuff, maybe, in both cases. The stuff we know about, obviously, there are some EPC regulations coming in, so landlords are going to have to make sure their property reaches the right level of EPC by 2030. That's going to be expensive for some people, and that's a big cost. There's no doubt the regulation is going to continue to bite, and we'll see how the renters' rights actually plays out, but that will increase the pressure and increase the risks. So people will perhaps feel need to spend more on compliance rather than less. I think licenses are going to continue to grow. Now the local council have worked out this is a massive revenue generator. We're talking £25 million in London alone so far this year. So they are generating quite a lot of revenue. That's only going to increase from the current number. I mean, management costs are going to go up with inflation, I suspect, at this point, in terms of the actual goods and cost of materials and indeed labour. The interest rates might improve from where we are. I mean, obviously we have the Gulf to get rid of and see what impact that has, but any interest rate decline in 12 months' time might help, but that's probably a while away. So there isn't much that's going to improve the situation. I think the big unknown at this point is what will the politicians want to do next, because they've obviously got a bit between their teeth. They regard landlords as the archetypal money tree, and they will continue to hit them, I suspect. And that could be national insurance, which has been rumoured, rent caps, which has been rumoured. These are all things that politicians obviously might feel the need to pull the lever on. So, you know, I think there's a danger if the real situation isn't very visible, which is why I'm talking to you now and why I'm talking to newspapers and everyone else. If the situation isn't really visible, then the wrong decision will be made and landlords will be squeezed even harder.
Yes.
So, you know, I can't see it getting much better in the near term, especially not in the long term.
I know this is a very loaded and silly question, but why does it matter if landlords make money?
Okay, so you have to step back a bit and look at the housing situation in the UK. So just to give some context, we have 5.1 million rental properties in the UK, about 4.7 in England and about 1.07 in London. That's a lot of rental property. Our housing market, and the reason why rental property exists ultimately is because not everybody can buy their house. And as we know, house prices relative to income has increased quite significantly, and therefore the average first-time buyer is buying much later than they were. Now, the political choice is to build more houses quicker, which one can't disagree with. Trouble is, the rate at which they're building houses is still very slow. So maybe this year we might get to 180, 200,000. But to give you an idea, we probably need to hit 250,000 just to stand still. And that's not removing any of the historic backlog of the imbalance between buy and buyers. So we've got a lot of households who want to move into property every year, and we're not building houses fast enough, and we don't look like we're going to build houses fast enough for some time to come. And that problem is a long-term problem. It will get worse and worse, because every time you undershoot, which we will do this year, you are going to create more and more tightness in the rental market. So that's the sort of the housing element. If you then think about the rental market, if people start selling their properties, which, to be honest, if you look at our numbers and you still want to use an agent and you're still running it the way you always have, you're not going to make any money. And if you don't make any money, why on earth would you rent a property when you can put the money in an ISA and go home? And it will keep returning that interest, and you don't have to do anything. No one's going to come knocking on your door with a £40,000 fine. You are in a safe position, which is why we compare returns from a landlord with returns from an ISA, because that's a very safe investment, and you still get 4.5%. You can get a lot higher if you want to take a bit of risk. Again, not the same risk you're taking as a landlord. So this is not an attractive place to be. And we know from the conversations we've had with a lot of landlords about this subject that more people are going to sell. So we've seen some selling, but we're going to see more, and we're going to see more precisely because of all the factors I've talked about. And the trouble with that is, if you remove the rental capacity, then rents will only go up for tenants. So they're going to hurt the one group of people that politicians seem focused on, which is tenants, because you're going to reduce the number of rental properties, and you're not going to replace them with new houses because we're not building them fast enough just to deal with the current demand, let alone make some indent in the historic element. So we've got a long-term problem, and this is a decade plus. Even if you build at rates of 300 or 400, even 500,000 homes a year, which we're nowhere near today, even if you build at that rate, it's going to take you 5-10 years to resolve this issue. And there's plenty of research out there, which I could quote ad nauseum, but this is not the answer, which is to squeeze landlords and get them to sell, which is what's happening now. So we're already in this situation, and we've gone too far. And the question is, will the government start to be a little bit more helpful towards landlords rather than continually hit?
I agree, buddy. I think when you take away more by people leaving, and you want the demand, the only thing that's going to happen is there's going to be more demand, as in there's going to be more tenants that want to go for less properties, which pushes the price up because supply versus demand, right? And I've always thought it's unfair that how much, don't get me wrong, things need to be regulated, looked after, made sure that they are decent for people to live in. But I do feel there needs to be a balance between, they've got to make money, because at the end of the day, if they don't make money, no one's going to do it.
And that's a simple point. Nobody will buy a property to rent or keep renting a property if this is the dynamic they're faced with, which is a few percent returns, a lot of risk. And that's a significant problem for the UK as a whole. And it's for the birds if you think you're going to increase the number of houses in this country fast enough to remove the pressure on rental prices. And if all you're doing is make it worse. So this is not something you can wave a wand and suddenly in a few years solve the problem. It's going to take decades before we have enough houses that rental market becomes less important. Right now it's crucial. And the dynamics from a P&L perspective are not respecting that, how crucial that is.
Phil, it's been fantastic having you on the show. Thank you so very much for all your insights and bringing in the report. Very much appreciate it. And we'll have you on as a guest again soon.
Look, Lee, that's very kind. I mean, if people want to read the report in full, please do go to the Hello Neighbour website. It's on the Insights tab, and you can read it in full. But I mean, I'll just leave people with a very clear thought: is people should think very hard about whether they manage the property themselves or whether they do it DIY, or whether they use an agent. You can save a lot of money. Think about your management costs, and above all, think about being a landlord as a professional, not as an amateur. So think like a professional, reduce risk, do the right things, may cost you a tiny bit of money, but protect your revenue and reduce your costs as much as you can.
Phil, thank you for that final thought. Appreciate your time, and thank you all for listening.
Cheers. Thanks, Lee.